Oh, we are back. I know this is this is the best surprise for anyone who's listening on audio. We have a tiger and Gulo dressed up at, well, he has his normal hat on, and Gowrie is a tiger officially. It's Halloween. You know why not? It's a beautiful thing.
Is Gowrie part of the tiger team?
Is he Tony?
No.
Oh, that's Gator. You know, I thought I had the best dad joke earlier, and then I realized I must have heard it somewhere, but it came from actually one of Alice's books. It was, "You're doing a good job." I know that might sound cheesy.
No.
But you hear it, and it's like, oh, so good. Today's topic comes from CryptoCat. I'm so excited. One, again, new YouTuber, all that, like gushing, like it's so cool for someone else to like jump in and even like mention you, which is just so cool. But he mentioned a topic in our last live stream, which was about hacking back. He referenced an article. Gowrie's going to give a little bit more clarity on it. But what it was when companies get hacked, when governments get hacked, when whomever gets hacked, this idea of pushing back, of fighting back, of I'm going to go after the attacker and take back what's mine. And this is an interesting concept when it comes to a ransomware. But to add a little seasoning to it, I'm going to throw it over to Gowrie.
Sure. All right. So the prompting behind this, I guess GCHQ, British Intelligence, came out and said that they're going to look at deploying their new national cyber force to quote unquote go after ransomware gangs. Most of the time, these gangs are, foreign entities, right? So people that are not inside your own country that are hacking you because they're outside the jurisdiction of law enforcement in your country. And this is underlined by the fact that, ransomware is a common thing. We've been talking about it for probably years now. Like 3 or 4 years is when it really started to hit hospital systems. It really started to hit, the most recent one, the pipeline that everyone was aware of, things like that. And there has been conversation over the past few years of, who do you call? Ghostbusters, clearly, but no, but who do you call? Like ransomware, you get hit by ransomware, and it's not just, we can say as an individual, who do we call? But that's not what we're talking about. A pipeline, an oil pipeline or like critical infrastructure gets hit by ransomware. The hospital system. Who does the hospital call? Do they call the FBI? Right? Because if this group is outside the United States, the FBI can't reach beyond the borders of the United States. I don't know the relative thing in Britain, but looking at GCHQ, that sounds like British intelligence. That seems like they do have a charter that can approve these things beyond the borders of the UK. And I'm being explicit here. This article states that they're going to enable their national cyber force, which means these are government people. These are government employees and government groups, not civilian people who are being given the omni-domni to hack back. And we'll discuss that a little bit, but this is the issue, right? Like from the US perspective, if a hospital gets hacked, do they call the NSA? Like, where would you even, like, what phone would you even pick up? What phone number would you think? Like, and this was actually a topic of a Sky Talk at DEF CON a few years ago. Do you call the Army? Do you call the Army CERT team, right? Like, who is it who is the cavalry was the name of the Sky Talk, or who, call the cavalry, what have you.
You need to call the Brute Squad. We are the Brute Squad.
What's up, Gulo?
Can't you call Interpol? Isn't that what Interpol's designed for?
Maybe. But this was the open question, right? Like, if you call Interpol and say, like, I got hit by ransomware, but you don't know whether or not it came from inside your own country or from outside your country, just to get that attribution can require active measures back, right? Just to figure out where they are. And so this comes down to the open question, and this is the question that CryptoCat posed. I'm actually just going to read it. Assuming the general principle is ethical, what specific actions are within the acceptable parameters for taking down, ransomware infrastructure, and how do we go after these individuals? And I don't think anyone has really solved this question. So that's the topic of today.
the other thing I'd throw out there is like there is a remarkable amount of nuance to like coverage, because like for instance, where's the infrastructure hosted? Because like ransomware has been hosted in like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud, and there's a lot of reasons and benefits for the attacker to do it there. Yep. Well, those servers are within the jurisdiction, but the data is not within the jurisdiction. So there's whole legal precedent along there. And then, okay, well, let's say AWS seizes the server, gains access to the private keys, which are used to encrypt the data, which could be used to decrypt the data. How do they go up? Like, there's a whole process they need to build to validate whose data is whose data to release it. So like, it becomes remarkably nuanced the farther you get with it.
Hey, Gator, you're literate. There's a
that's a scary thought. Go ahead.
There was a book, security-ish book that was called, I think it was called Worm or something, where it talked about how private people came together to shut down one of the first major internet worms that was spreading across the planet.
I have read it, or I have not read it, but I do have it on my list to go through and listen to, audiobook, whatever. The other book that comes to mind immediately is The Offensive Security by Paul Asadorian and John Strand, way back in the day when they were just getting their podcast started, something like 10 years ago or so, and talking about what, at that point in time, the legal cases were for you to be able to actually do that versus inviting them onto your network. And then if they're currently on your network, as long as they check the little EULA for agreeing to become a user on the network, and you agree to this, this, and this, if they read the EULA, then you could do whatever you wanted to. But if it was outside of that, or it went back out to the public internet, other than putting like canary tokens places, they didn't have a good legal stance to where nobody wanted to touch it, because this was such a interesting problem.
So, okay. I just looked it up. So Worm by Mark Bowden was a book I read. I've actually read it a couple of times. It's actually an incredibly boring book unless you are a computer person, because he goes through a lot of technical details. But it was talking about the Configure worm from 2008. And what it goes through is this exact scenario of the world was getting hit by Configure, and there were some security professionals at different companies that noticed that a worm was hitting the internet. And then they started calling each other. So I'm going to get the orders wrong. I'm going to get the companies wrong. Please don't quote me on this, but it's like some dude at a university in California found it, and then they messaged somebody at Microsoft and said, hey, there's a problem. And then Microsoft got IBM involved, and it all cascaded with these private companies that were tracking how the worm was propagating. And then from the way the worm was propagating, they were trying to figure out how they could stop it, how they could prevent it, and started working with like the different government agencies, and then started working with the different DNS registrars to try to start blackholing all of the domains that Configure was using. And it wasn't necessarily backhacking, but this was the scenario of private companies going through, identifying a threat, working together, and eventually bringing in government agencies to start helping them.
So here's the difference between that and this, right? Because Configure was huge. I was in the Navy at the time, and I remember doing all the incident response and all that stuff. It was a huge topic of discussion. Those people, the people who released the Configure worm, didn't actually use it for anything. Mm-hmm. All they did was release it, and it went crazy. And then they eventually found these groups. If you look it up on Wikipedia, they arrested 4 people and they were sentenced to 4 years in prison. But they didn't actually use anything. They didn't use it for anything. Now we have groups that are infecting, with very sophisticated pieces of malware. Like, don't think that ransomware is just something you get popped with because you open, an attachment. Maybe that's how the first initial foothold happens. But these things, are sophisticated pieces of software that is actively spread through networks and take advantage of various vulnerabilities. And they're actively using them to extort people out of, I would probably say, billions of dollars at this point, right? It's probably reached that point.
There's a couple things I wanted to mention. One with Conflicker. So I was at General Electric at the time. Again, they were one of the groups that they group with other massive organizations. Like, there's so much to learn, and not everyone has these full-blown SOC teams. So they shared a ton of information. So, like, when you get hit by something, here's the information we're finding. What was so cool about Conflicker, and again, like, sorry, there's multiple versions and iterations of it, like, just from the attacker's reverse engineering perspective, they started black holing DNS, and version 4 of Conflicker would brute force its own domains, so you couldn't just blacklist them.
Yeah,
it would brute force its own domains using its own little secret algorithm, which then would find new command and control systems. So there wasn't just like a hard-coded list.
Yep. There was actually a really good paper that came out around the time searching for botnets, using very statistical analysis of domain names. And I actually implemented that system. And then I went to college, and I just happened to, sit next to the people who published that paper. I was like, oh, hey, like, I read your paper and did that thing, and it was really effective, and it was really, really good at finding Configure. Point of order, there's no L in Configure.
Right?
Conflict.
It's so easy.
Am I saying it wrong the whole time?
Thank you. Yes.
It's not a McAfee situation, though. We're fine.
Yeah. So all I was going to say
not a McAfee.
Yeah. All I was going to say was, if you're interested, look up Zipfian distributions, ZIPF distributions, and it's this cool thing where words in the English language tend to follow a certain pattern about how common certain letters are and how common n-grams are. And if you just apply the Zipfian distribution, like, you will find like every botnet on your system, basically. Not every botnet, but like ones that reach out to various, websites, assuming you can look at DNS.
The other thing I wanted to mention was, like you said, like, the ransomware in some ways is remarkably sophisticated. In other ways it isn't. But, like, something to be said here is ransomware, the reason people pay it is because it decrypts. You pay it and it decrypts. Mm-hmm. And it's not just like, oh, we're going to push out this virus and it's going to encrypt and then we don't support it. Like, there's multiple iterations. There's multiple versions. They have patch notes. They have GitHub repositories. They have use case and they have their own test cases and their own pipelines. And in some cases, they have their own support line. Like their own email support. Yep. Hey, I'm trying to decrypt your ransomware, and I paid, and I put in the code, and they have support to help you through this process. Yep.
Like, sometimes it's better than a paid company's.
In many ways, it is, because it's a for-profit organization. Like, it is a profitable organization. So every piece of work effort they put in, they can attach a dollar figure saying, we were able to capture this much additional margin because we maintain a support. Like, they're full-blown companies, and the unfortunate part is in some countries, it's not necessarily illegal. Like, that's a bold statement, but like, or even encouraged in some
ways. I was gonna say it's not necessarily illegal, or like I stopped short of saying it's sponsored, right? Because there's a difference between telling a company or creating a company or creating a group to go do this and wreak havoc, and just being like, that's neat, I don't care, and I'm not going to exactly do anything to stop it. Like, there's a line there that, I'm going to let the governments debate the what that actually is, that sponsorship or not. But that's not my position to take. I'm just looking at the technical and maybe some of the ethical details of being the person that hacks back. The hacking back portion, I know today, right now, that there are commercial companies out there that are large, that do have entire SOC teams, that are very affected by ransomware, that are trying to protect their users from these threats on their platforms, and they are actively trying to figure out ways to attribute these people and sue them. Because, as you said, some of these places are functionally companies in foreign countries, and those countries just don't care, right? Or they don't have the wherewithal or the ability to really take them down because maybe that it's being run by a cartel, right? Like that's the thing to keep in mind. Like, imagine if this was coming out of some place like Mexico and a cartel was running it. Do we think that the government would actually stamp down on it in the same way that they're having issues?
Praxeus brings up a good point, which is illegal versus not prosecuted. Hold on, I was going to say, he brings up a good point where it's illegal versus non-prosecuted. It might still be illegal, but it might not be prosecuted. Also, Cannibal, welcome. It's been a while. I'm so happy to see you on stream. Glad you were able to make it. Go on, Gulo.
There's a precedence for this, and it looks like I'm having some internet issues. So if I drop, I will be back.
Your audio is coming.
So there's a precedence for this. If you look at the fake pharmaceutical businesses of 10, 15 years ago, or they may even still exist now. So you could go through and you could buy fake Viagra. You could go through and buy fake Ritalin. They had all kinds of fake pharmaceuticals. But what they did when they started researching these was that they were real pharmaceuticals. And they had help desk lines. They had people that you could call. They had entire business models on this illegal pharmaceutical industry that you could use. And the reason they did it was they wanted repeat customers. They found a way to acquire the drugs to send out to their customers at a decreased price compared to what the United States would sell it, what like India was selling it. And because of that, they built a business model around it, and they wanted to make sure that they had repeat customers. It was a completely underground, illegal system that they were doing, and multiple governments across the world banded together to shut it down. But it was a legitimate company. It was a legitimate business, and they had a legitimate product acquired illegally that they were selling illegally. But they weren't like poisoning people like everyone thought they were. They weren't selling like saline, or they weren't selling specific things that were going to harm you or were placebos. They were actually selling the proper drugs. And it was a complete business model. It was amazing.
But I don't know how that overlays with the hacking back thing, but I guess we took those down. That was probably just straight litigation, right?
Well, no, it was, we were talking about how the ransomware actually has help desks and support, and they're actually legitimate businesses.
Yeah.
So they are, it's the same thing. We've set precedents for all of this in the past.
Right. All right. So I want to try and get back to the active, we'll say active countermeasures, right? Where what are you doing to prevent these people, and who is doing it? Is it, who is the cavalry? What's the phone you pick up to say, hey, I'm being affected by this? And B, is it, at what point as a private individual or a commercial entity does it become unethical or illegal to reach out and touch to try and get attribution to figure out who to take legal action against, is kind of the area. CryptoCat actually offered this question, which I think is really good. Will quote unquote hacking back involve some physical elements, i.e. social engineering, breaking and entering, physical surveillance? It could be a slippery slope, right? If you have that, counter attribution, and are you putting yourself at risk to blowback from those organizations taking action against you? And I think that's really interesting because Mark Rober, right? Here's a good example of this. You had the porch pirates and you had like the phone call scammers. Mark Rober on YouTube, another famous YouTuber, did the glitter bomb thing against porch pirates, and then got caught up in like the phone scammers thing and ended up sending one of those, glitter packages off to the one of the phone centers, and discovering that there's this whole multi-level system for these scammers as well. It's all kind of the same thing. And I would view that as a form of, back hacking or hacking back because
absolutely.
you're taking an active measure. But he got the local police involved because there was a local aspect to this, right?
Mhm.
The packages are being sent through the mail. It's got multiple things. There's people receiving it and passing it along and moving it up the chain, but it always ends up going back to another country. And I think that is ultimately the difficult part of this is, you know, there's cavalry to call when everything is happening within the confines of your own country, right? Because you can call your local domestic, federal, or local, you know, police, right?
Let's split what you just said into two pieces. Gulo, and I'll pull it after you do.
So,
and he's frozen.
He's gone.
And he's gone. He's all gone.
It's your opportunity to use it as a meme.
I know it's a great image. I'm gonna just throw it up on screen, and if you're listening on audio, it's just Gulo like halfway through a sentence with his mouth open, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. We
One does not simply.
One does not simply. The thing I wanted to pull is there's two threads there. One is at what point does it become hacking back? And then the other one is these are rather large organizations. Here, let me pull Gulo back in here. So I'll re-say that another thing is there's two parts. At what point does it become hacking back? And at what point should we be like necessarily worried? Gulo, you're a terrible person. He comes in and he makes it look like he's frozen.
He's frozen again.
Oh, gosh.
Just let it go. Let it go.
And then at what point should you be worried about hacking back? Because these, whether it's, you know, cartel, state-sponsored, whatever you want to call them, like these are groups whose sole goal is to manipulate people out of money. And if you get that in their way with that, like that's scary. Like this is big boy stuff where like it's not just like, oh, they're gonna come back and hit your network. Like it's dangerous.
Hacking back. I got this now. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna freeze again, but I got this. So hacking back is the Mark Roper thing is actually a very good example of this. There was a problem that he experienced and that others were experiencing, so he came up with a solution for it. And as he was coming up with a solution for it, he started to get more and more people involved. And this is when he started getting local authorities and different things involved. And I think this is where us as a community would not necessarily come together, but I have friends in different companies that if they were hacked, they would contact me. I would go do research into this and I would hit X barrier. And then I would reach out to some other friend that I have, whether it's in a law enforcement, government agency, or another security company, and then be like, hey, I've hit this barrier. Can you help me go past this? And then they would contact their people. They would contact their people. And this comes back to how Conficker started. Of people started to contact people on their list to put together not necessarily a task force, but to try to solve a problem. And then it escalated until the government agencies were involved and it became a global effort.
So let's talk about this, though, because I think there's a line there. At a certain point, you go, okay, we need to do DNS reconnaissance, like to find out which DNSs we need to black hole so these things are not, or block hole or whatever. I don't know what the verbiage is now. Which ones do we need to block so the DNS, so the malware can't reach out? Like you can do DNS enumeration. Like, okay, so like fail to ban, that's still on your infrastructure. At one point, though, you're reaching out. When I port scan their system, at what point is it like a Shodan type scanner versus like the malicious intent thing? At some point, there's a line. Where is it?
And the question becomes, do you want to have that name for that law and be that use case, right? So make sure you donate it to the EFF so you have legal representation, and then passing it back.
Now, we do have some precedents for this. Port scanning is something that happens all the time, continuously. People will nmap pretty much anything. And yes, I will port scan whoever's trying to connect to me. If I see something malicious, I will port scan them. I will do my reconnaissance to find out where they're from. Actively attacking their system and gaining access to it, meaning exploiting holes in it. Something that isn't being broadcast specifically by them. So port scanning to me is I list what's currently available to everyone on the internet. If I start trying to penetrate the system as I'm looking for a specific bug in SSH, if I know they have a version of SSH that's vulnerable, yes, I know how they have the bug. But if I try to use that, but there's another point to this, was in the US recently, there's I want to say it's in Michigan or Maryland or something, where the school sent some information out on had some information out on a website, and somebody looked at the HTML source on it.
It's so much better.
Missouri. It was Missouri.
It's so much better than that. And it was a company or a school or whatever the system was. You would make a request for something and it would send you back the information about everyone, including, I believe, their social security numbers. And it was not available on the view, but if you just clicked view source, there was the whole table of every user in the system, right? Like, that's how bad it was.
This is remarkably common. Like, this is remarkably common using front-end protections.
And where he's going with this is the court case says opening and looking at the source on a web page is, they're suing, saying that, this guy was hacking, and which is comical, and it's going to get thrown out of court, and it's just it's a spectacle. But our laws in the country are so antiquated and not equipped with being able to determine, what is legal and what is not with regards to reaching out. I don't even think I think port scanning is still in a gray area.
It is. It 100%
it absolutely is. I won't do any of it. Like, personally, I don't engage in any of it whatsoever because I just don't want to be exposed legally without a written document that says you have absolutely no liability, I'm sure.
Gator's shirt has a very good point. Authorized pen testing is not a crime. Authorized. Yeah. But something to mention on that article, though, like it's not like, they'll right-click view source. This is not like, in 2010 when this happened, or 2005. Yeah. This is 15 days ago. Like, right-clicking on the browser, clicking inspect. And the worst part about this is, I believe this specific attack in the GET request was the session cookie, which is going to be logged everywhere. Again, when SSL is terminated and whatnot. So, like, there's that whole aspect where it's like, but you're going back to the active hacking. Gula was talking about exploiting SSH or exploiting this. Yeah. Like, this is direct access. Like, SANS top 10, OWASP top 10 vulnerability is authentication bypass or direct access. It's where they don't check for an authentication cookie on the request. That's not hacking. That's not even using a tool. That's using a browser to do a GET request.
Yeah.
And this is where I think I'm gonna bring it back here, which is there is no legal precedent for so much of this, and that's what's kind of terrifying. But let's get back to the hacking back.
Yeah, let's actually narrow our definition of hacking back, right? Because we can talk about is port scanning this is, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds with, I don't want to be too much of an engineer about this, but let's just narrow our definitions to something we all agree on. I think we can all agree the moment you reach out and get a system to do something, whether that is to collect information or, to try and poke and prod at a C2 server, it doesn't matter what that is. The moment you reach out and touch someone else's system, I think that is the point at which you're taking active measures, right? Anything that you have the ability to go reach out and, like, let's say you control a DNS server and you can get permission to go touch and look at the logs or, play with things. That's an active measure, but that's not hacking back because you have the authority to, you have the authority to do all that. The moment you touch a system, you do not have authorization from the person who owns it to touch. That's the moment I think that we can agree that there's a line. Yes.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that. I think it's intent, and then I'll hand it to Google. It is intent. It is 100% intent. I don't think it's a technical thing. I don't think it's reaching out and touching it, because a lot of systems are going to, is going to fingerprint it. It's going to dig it. You're going to see. You're going to do some research. I think the intent is right when you go, I'm going to go after this system. That is at what point, and that's where the legal system, I think, becomes a little gray, because it's really difficult to notate intent for an action.
Gula.
So I agree with Silk, and I understand your point, Gowry, but things like Whois, things like Dig, if I have an IP address in my logs, because I am going to have an IP address in my logs, most likely not DNS, I'm going to go do a reverse DNS lookup on that. I'm going to do a Whois. I'm going to see if it's associated with a domain. If it's associated with a domain, I'm going to go check out their website. And this comes back.
Okay. Let's narrow it further. You disagree, right? So anything that is publicly accessible that you're able to access, that's fair game.
No.
No.
Okay.
I would argue this because this goes back to that direct. I control the camera. I'm sorry. I'm totally bullying it. But if you have open authentication, if you have a vulnerability in your website, that's public domain because you directly access the admin pages. All right. Who's next? Gator.
So my 2 cents worth on this is that hey, this is our opinions. We aren't lawyers.
Yeah.
We don't play lawyers on TV. This is where you'd go to EFF or employ your own lawyers. So everybody do the pose. Thanks, Gulo. Ultimately, when it comes down to interpreting law, that's not our job. And it comes down to legal interpretation. I'm not even going to claim to know anything on that.
Let me clarify what I'm trying to do. I am not trying to state that, disclaimer, don't go out and touch anyone's systems that you're not authorized to touch, period. The end. Like we all agree on that standpoint right now, right? We're not giving people advice on this. What I'm trying to do is narrow the definition so that we can be much clearer about what it is that we're talking about with the audience as with regards when we say hacking back, right? And what I'm just trying to say is that there is a point at which you cross from, maybe pinging a system to trying to get that system to do something it wasn't intended to do, right?
Yes. So I agree with that. If you're trying to do something to that system other than identify that it's there, then yes, I think you're going too far. Identifying something there, which is why I think port scans, and I get the point against port scans as well. So at the beginning of this, before we went live, I told everyone that I was going to drive this off a cliff.
Of course you are.
The Mark Roper, he did something else. I believe it was him. And this is more of an analogy on backhacking, and it kind of takes us in a slightly different way. Any of you guys watch the squirrel videos that he did with the bird feeders?
Oh, yeah, Mark Rober. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think I've seen one of them.
Yeah. So that's kind of like setting up a honeypot where he was being hacked by squirrels, and then he was building an obstacle course in his backyard of honeypots that allowed them, if they were successfully able to traverse it, to get to, I think he had like special nuts and stuff that he was putting out up and beyond what the actual bird feeder had that he was trying to protect. And so if we're not actively hacking back, because we're now talking about, can we look to see if they have a presence on the internet? I think we agree. Yes, we can look to see if they have a presence on the internet, but we're not actively trying to bypass any of their systems. We're like, do they have a website? Do they have an email address? Can I look at their Facebook? Those types of things. But what about setting up honeypots that are not necessarily hacking challenges, but it's the same thing as the phone calls.
That's well established fair game, in my opinion. Yeah. If you're setting up a system for people to pop and they do it, that's you're collecting. Yeah. I don't see that as any different than doing open source intelligence collection.
I think agree with though that. let's bring this one step farther, and then I'll hand it to Gulo. So using the squirrel analogy, first, we're crossing an ethical boundary right when I say this, which is a poison nut at the end of it. Like, I'm not advocating killing squirrels. But if he did this whole obstacle course and put a poison nut in there, the same thing could be said. What happens if I do a honeypot, which looks like an FTP server, OpenFTP, and I put like an exe on there, which is my own ransomware? Now, not trying to get Bitcoin or anything like that, but all it does is just encrypt everyone's files who downloads it. Like, it's a poison nut. Is that Is that allowed?
Oh, Silk. Why?
Well,
Why you go?
Yeah, no. I think this is a perfect example of hacking
This
back,
is.
right? Like, or let's not even go to that extent. It's just something that reaches back out to you and tells you what their IP is and whatever information it can collect. I think that is a perfect example of an active measure that isn't necessarily destructive. That you have to ask whether or not companies or private individuals can do that. Do I think investigative services can do that? Yeah, I think they can get the authorization to do stuff like that.
So
Here's
Hold on, let Gulo go.
So with that, the best example I have of that is if you look at, I'm going to use the new one, Meta, or you're using, I don't know, freaking TikTok or Twitter. You have all of these apps out there now that all they do is collect data on their users. If I set up a honeypot that already has software that I sell or make that's on that FTP server, that all it does is collect information on users, it's already in an app store somewhere, and I post that in that honeypot, that is no different than what my actual application does. If they download that and I'm able to track them, then that's still part of the system that I'm already using.
I believe this comes back to intent, which is where Silk was going before, is that it comes down to intent. Like, did you put it there with the intent of exploiting, the exploiters, or did you put it there with the intent of just happening to put it there? Like, I don't know how that flies in a court of law.
The reason I started laughing, though, is what Gulo just described was if I have an application, which I put within my honeypot, which collects information, I don't know why I find this so funny. In order for that to be legal and allowed, his application would have to adhere to things like GDPR because it's now collecting access.
That's
so
funny.
He would have to make this malicious thing, put it in his honeypot, and then make sure it adheres to all the privacy laws.
Yes. Or the California Consumer Protection Act, or Idaho's.
Which means notifying the attackers that, there's cookies that are tracking them when they, access your FTP.
Gosh.
That can be in a README right on the FTP.
Oh, just hide it inside a EULA somewhere like way, way, way down.
There was a group I used to belong to several years ago when I was doing more security related things, and we did. I moonlighted as a REM. I was a reverse engineer of malware. We were a group that traded viruses and malware around private companies. I think that there were some people in the government and security. There was a whole bunch of us. And we would trade these viruses around through our email. We would download them. We would reverse them. We'd figure out how they were packaged. And then we would submit reports of these back to like antivirus companies or law enforcement or whoever. And I had at any point in time, I started setting up like fish bowls where I had multiple viruses running on virtual machines to see how they would interact with each other. And I was playing with them, but I also had a lot of those in my email. And then on my work, I had a lot of folders that had do not open and they were all stored there. But if I had that stuff on my FTP server, whether or not it's a honeypot or my regular FTP server, to where I could go back and forth with those, that if it was internally accessible only, and you somehow managed to make it to those folders and you downloaded all of my 1,000 viruses that I was currently reverse engineering and you completely jacked up your system, am I held liable for that? Because my intent was I was reverse engineering.
The answer there is actually, I believe, pretty cut. And I feel like I just played the game. Well, actually, if anyone's seen that game, is the precedent there is you're hosting malware, like you're publicly hosting malware. You're being
No. He's saying it's one thing if it's on an FTP server. It's another thing if it is like actually behind. Internal. It's not publicly accessible, and you broke in and you took all of it. Right.
I'm just saying anyone who breaks into Gulo's system, the malware is absolutely the least of my concerns.
It's funny you're describing the way malware gets shared for analysis purposes. In modern day, it has been fascinating to me to see how, like, I feel like 10 years ago, it would just be like, I'll throw it in an encrypted file and then ship it over an email, right? I would never send samples over email these days. Like, I would rather just put it on a USB drive that says, like, horribly infected, do not plug into anything, and then literally mail that USB drive to somebody with, like, you know, I'm so paranoid of that stuff at this point that I'm just, it's pretty crazy.
There were thousands of us, and to get past all of the antivirus systems and on the internet we had a standard password for all the zip files, or in the email itself had the password for the zip file. So we'd encrypt the zip file of the virus and then send it out. But there were thousands of us on this email and part of this group, and we were all over the world. I guarantee, and statute of limitations, I broke the law somehow by trading this information back and forth. And there's a good chance that the group was breaking some laws in some country
Probably
by
not.
sharing this stuff.
Oh,
but it was all
when.
academic, and it was all, how do we solve these problems? I was working on like Torpig and stuff back in the day.
Yeah, in many cases, like, it would probably fall under the DMCA. Even though it sounds like it's a copyright act, there's a lot of things in there that affect security research. There's all kinds of things that have carve-outs for security research that you're probably covered.
You bring up a very good point. There were some viruses or pieces of malware that had copyright notices inside of them.
Yeah, totally. Well, but again, there's carve-outs for security research, right? And that's that was always a thing. And I'm not saying it's the best law, but they tried to be effective with it.
Right.
I do want to rewind though and try and get back down to like what are the boundaries of an organization? Like, let's take TikTok. Let's take any of these big corporations that have the ability and they are highly affected by malware in general. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where there is a cavalry for them to call, right? Or do you think that we're going to have very tighter integration between those security teams at these large companies and, government regulation that says, all right, in order to do this, you have to contact us first and then we'll give you approval or not? Do you think we'll ever get to that point?
I don't think we will, because of, just look at banking regulations, how we handle money, how we handle laundering money, those different things. It's a global problem that we still have century or two later, or a couple centuries, and it's nothing that's going to change because we have different countries that have different laws and regulations.
I still think it happens faster now, right?
True, but I still think that this is a militia-based solution of somebody gets hacked that I know, they're going to reach out to me and say, hey, can you help? I'm going to figure out what I can figure out, and then I'm going to reach out to the person I know that can help me move on to the next step. And then they're going to reach out until it becomes a community thing, going to DEF CON, to these different conferences and making these contacts.
Let me turn that around though. At what point, I think that by and large already somewhat exists. A lot of the security groups between major companies already talk to each other. At what point do you think should a government formalize that and make it a requirement after you're a certain size to, be part of a compendium of security researchers that add into this, corpus of information?
I don't think that it's necessarily, okay, I get your point, and I think at some point we would need that, but generally as security researchers, there is a point that we automatically reach out to law enforcement. We reach out to the government and say, hey, we have a problem. Can we get your assistance with it? And here's our information. Here's what we've learned. And then we continue, they continue, and then we share information back and forth.
There's also times you're forced to reach out.
Yeah.
Gary?
No, I think we're all kind of like, it's an interesting question. And it's one I don't think anyone has the answer to. And I think this development of GCHQ pushing their national cyber force to actively respond is the beginning of it, right? I think all eyes are over there to figure out not one how it goes, because they're going to have PR nightmares, I imagine, in the process of figuring this out. But also, since other major countries are dealing with this as well, all eyes are on them to figure out, all right, are we going to model after what they're doing? I still think, I'll put it to you this way. I still think it's insane that the U.S. has a space force but not a cyber force. Like,
yeah. So,
right?
This is where I want where when you mentioned the question is like, at what point do we have one? And like, as goofy as this sounds, we're still really young in the internet age. Like, it started as brochureware, and now we've talked about it. Like, I believe we're in this social media thing. Everyone's starting to get connected. Like, it's not like, oh, all these kids in social media. That is what the internet is right now. It's moving back towards community and things like that. But going back to, when identity theft first occurred, it was, oh, you call the FBI and they're like, your identity isn't stolen. You're talking to us right now. And I've said this phrase before on stream, which is, but now you have your identity stolen. They're like, okay, here's form 1303. Go ahead, fill this out, send it back to us, and we'll sort it out. Right now, if you call and say we're being hacked, like this is, I think we had data stolen. I think it was ransomware. I think it went to this group. They go, oh, what do you want us to do about it? And it's at the beginning of like identity theft. And again, sometimes they're more actively involved, but we're slowly shifting to this point where there's a plan in place. Here is your response. Here is its incident response plan, which we have published online that you need to follow pending you have PII taken, you have PHI taken, and some of this has been formalized within like HIPAA and other compliances. Other times it's like you need to have a plan in place, and that's as far as the control goes.
So this is compartmentalization.
And then Gator's going. He hasn't talked forever, and I need to hear his smooth voice in my ear.
If we break this down into different compartments, okay, if my company is hacked, I'm going to search my logs. I'm going to find an IP address. I'm going to scan that IP address to see if it's an actual company. I'm going to do research on it without actually cracking anything for my company to figure out as much as I can. I'm going to reach out to somebody else. If you look at GCHQ, wow. If you look at what they're going to do, they're going to actively go through and they're going to scan and possibly backhack things, or they're going to scan first. If they find something in London, they're probably going to get warrants, or they're going to backhack it because they have the authority to do so. But if they find something in North Korea or China or something along those lines, they may not go down that path because that part of it's going to be sanctioned off. So they're going to have their own limitations, and they may reach out to those countries and say, hey, I've tracked it this far. Can you help?
And once again, getting back to what I was originally saying, and then we're going to go to Gator. This is why there is a specifically, I wanted to lay this out. Should civilians be engaging in this kind of activity? And I think unequivocally, almost everyone in the civilian, anyone in the security sector would say no, because you're going to create an escalation of, like, especially if they're in places that are not friendly countries, you can create an international incident. And then you get a call from the FBI that's like, why did you just screw up, all of these things? Or you make yourself, you open yourself up to retribution from nefarious individuals, right? So, but at the same time, like, this is where you get into, but how is there ever going to be enough people or enough of a cavalry to call that we can actively service issues like this? And it's a hard problem. I don't think anyone has the answer to that. Now let's go to Gator, though.
So to your point, and then I'll jump to a second one. When it came down to I am the cavalry, the whole movement that first started at the Sky Talks, then they had their own Twitter post. They had multiple follow-up talks, basically saying that we've got to enable ourselves. I see this changing in the world on how we're going through and dealing with this. If over in Europe, the GCHQ is going and doing this first time in public versus what other governments are doing in public is going to be one deal. But I will also say, reverting back and going to, hey, if you're just coming in to the InfoSec area, how can you know what normal traffic looks like compared to malicious traffic? And then if you're going to try to hack back, that attribution is really hard in this day and age. So unless you are setting up canary tokens, unless you are actually understanding what's on your network, what's your network inventory look like, what's your software install look like, what does normal traffic look like, there is so many things that we need to be doing better for ourselves that we can actually make sure, hey, this is normal versus this is not normal. And there are free softwares for that. There are paid softwares for that. There are third-party vendors that can do that. It all depends on cost, time, and effort, right?
I can answer that question. How to identify what's normal traffic and what's not normal traffic. Follow Gator's advice, do inventories, monitor network to figure out what your normal traffic is. Create a baseline. After you do that, go watch a ton of porn. Then keep monitoring your network. See what happens.
Oh gosh. You know, we were doing so well. There was I didn't have to put the I didn't have to put the explicit tag on this, and now all of a sudden I do.
Gulo was on the podcast.
And Gulo's talking about his Only Gulo site, onlygulo.com. It's not Braun. Oh, I love that site. That was a great
also
site.
Definitely not a honeypot. Only Gulo is not a honeypot.
Going back to this, go ahead. So,
okay, I'm gonna make this whole conversation so much worse, and I don't know how to make it better. Not on. We keep talking about systems. We keep talking about scanning, and I'm gonna drop the dirty word right now, which is, what about decentralization and blockchain in smart contracts, which are not hosted on anything and just exist out there? How is that? What about hacking back those? They're out there. They're vulnerable. And let's look at like what happened with Ethereum Classic and their smart contract, which just wrecked the whole Ethereum chain. Like
I don't think it's any different. So if I were to hack something, even if I was doing a pen test, I'm not doing it from home. I'm driving outside my city. I'm connecting to a Starbucks or a McDonald's Wi-Fi, and then I'm using a VPN Tor to connect to a VPN that's off in Timbuktu, and from that VPN I use Tor again that connects to a zombie somewhere in China. And then I do all my pen testing stuff.
What is your latency on that?
Oh my gosh.
It doesn't matter. It's text. I'm not watching video. Who cares? They're all SSH
did you know that if you're the only person who is anonymous in an area, you are mononymous, and that means you're not anonymous?
Yes,
I can't help but think it can be text. But like, I have when I have two chains going, all of a sudden my first one, like I'm just thinking about like reverse shells and things like that. I have one shell drop and the whole connection goes down.
Yeah,
using Tor twice. Like this is theoretical at best.
You're talking about using the blockchain and how anonymous and decentralized it is. I'm already using systems as zombies all over the world. I'm already decentralized. If one zombie goes down, I still have other zombies on a botnet that I can connect to and use, which is how hacking is mainly done nowadays. Is you don't send crap out from your own system. You don't even write it on your own system. You write it on some 90-year-old woman's freaking retirement MacBook from 2008.
Dude, you say that, but as these tools, and we were talking about this, as these tools become more accessible, there was a GitHub repo, not like maybe less than a year ago, that was like, here's my ransomware platform. And it was, free on the internet for anyone to grab and use. And it was like a whole development. Like, was
it called the open source ransomware project?
Yeah, something like that. But like, as these things become more accessible.
Look who owns that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's funny.
Okay. But, I mean, everybody knows you don't hack banks across bank lines or state lines. Come on, Gulo.
But so as these things become more accessible, and there are no crap software development kits to develop these things, that's going to become much more common, where you have the lowest common denominator doing the software development and launching it from their own systems. And when you say like this is what I want to pound in, right? Like there is this idea that the people running these operations are incredibly technically sophisticated, and that is just not entirely true. Right?
Well, you're talking about ransomware as a service too. Like that exists, and it's very prevalent. I think it's like it wasn't that bad of a cost. It was like $200 a month. You can get your own ransomware server, and you don't even have to work on the malware. All you have to do is work on your own dropper.
Gulo desperately wants to talk.
So yes, and I agree with that to a certain extent. But this stuff has been going on for 20 years, where you have people that develop the exploits. They write the software, they build the packages, and then they sell it on black market websites for script kiddies to go download. And then the script kiddies go through and they run this against whatever it is that they want to run. And it's generally the script kiddies that mess it up and get caught and go to jail. But the people that are writing it are generally really technically savvy.
Yeah, for sure.
What was it? Low orbit ion cannon?
Yeah. So the thing I'm positing though is that like I would imagine maybe the biggest companies are being low and slow targeted by those super sophisticated actors that are, going to take all of those precautions. But in the meantime, the general public is being hit by a wide array of varying levels of sophistication. And there just isn't enough of a cyber force, if you will, quote unquote.
Cavalry.
Cavalry out there to call.
Who are you going to call?
And this is the problem. Right? As these tools and these development kits become more easily available, do we think it's going to get better anytime soon? Do we think that it's going to take, hard regulation and jail time and, lawsuits and, stringing these people up essentially to like get the low level actors to drop off? And that's where I'm kind of at.
We're going to Gator.
I'm going to jump in real quick here because one of the things when we're talking about if we're waiting for somebody else to do it, I'm just going to say, hey, stop. Let's actually be the change that we want to see.
Yeah.
So in this case, how are we going to go through and try that? How do we know that we have internal policies set up on how we're going to address this when this happens? And to be honest with you, if we're going to roll a die, let's go through and see how we're scoring on that. And honestly, one of the things that we can do is a tabletop. All right. How often are you going to go through? Oh, go ahead.
The context of all of this is the context of all of this is active measures back, right? Like we can do all of the defensive internal reaction and, yes, I 100% agree with you. It's that point of I can no longer move forward with attributing this to a group without actively probing it, right? That's the line we're discussing.
I'm going to propose a talk for next week, because we've hit on this twice now. The last time we were talking about different types of systems that were insecure, and now we're talking about the internet. The internet is generally the Wild West. Maybe we should talk about regulation and decentralization, because there's inherent problems with regulating the internet. How would you go about doing it without stifling innovation? And could you even do that with how it's already built? Everything is just randomly connected together. And so having these systems, you're always going to have bad actors no matter what system you use. If you look at any society, you always have the crazy person that's just evil. And then you have the general populace that follows the rules. And then you have do-gooders. And actually, now that I'm saying that and looking at all the screens, I would say that I'm probably the chaotic evil. I can see Gator as the do-gooder trying to solve issues. Good. And yeah. And I think that
am I just the chaotic neutral?
I mean, yeah.
But even in our own group, no one really regulates me other than they kick me out of the booth because it smells incredibly bad because of something Gowrie did.
I wore that shirt at work all day yesterday. They're like, why do you have a ghost on your shirt? I'm like, read the bottom. There's a story that goes with this. Go check out this YouTube video.
Oh goodness, I need to do the video of my black badge. I keep wanting to sit down to do it, but every time I do, I know I won't be able to do it justice. It's going to be amazing. I'm putting a lot of pressure on mine, but that Gulo and his thong. Go on.
Oh, I was going to say this topic might be one that we need to break down into discrete, subtopics to talk on stream sometime, because there's just so much here. Like, if I'm gonna go back and listen to this stream later, and I'm gonna be like, wow, we were all over the place. Like, we went down, and there's a whole there's a whole side of this of like people hosting illicit material on the internet that is really bad and no one likes, and how do we take those services down, and who should be responsible for taking those services down, those types of things. And as a civilian, should you be engaging that things? The answer is no. Don't.
Yeah, no. It should definitely be no, because all of a sudden, like, the other part is you interact with possibly active investigations, or IP addresses you're on are now within this log list, which might be happen, and that's kind of what happened with the Tor story. And
we haven't even discussed that portion of let's say all of a sudden it becomes legal to do some well-defined mechanism of hacking back for attribution purposes only, right? Let's say that becomes legal. What kind of investigations are you going to end up interfering with by engaging in those things, right? You could have a low and slow investigation that is collecting information, and all of a sudden you have a loud individual at one of these corporations just hit those boxes, and then they get paranoid and just scrap the whole thing and move to another set of boxes, right? Like, that is a whole thing that we haven't even touched. That is a minefield of ethical questions.
There was, back in the 90s, when I first 90s, maybe 80s, when I first started hacking, when I first started doing any security, any things and learning, there was a group called EHAP. And there's a word in there that they've told me multiple times I can't say on stream, but it's ethical hackers against very bad people. And what it is I wasn't part of that group. I was never cool enough to be part of that group, but it was something that I actually worked on, and I would try to figure out different things for. And it was hunting down people that, for lack of a better phrase, shouldn't exist. And yes, back then, there was nobody researching this. There weren't any government agencies. There was no there were laws and stuff against it, but no one was doing anything. It was the Wild West. You could do whatever you wanted to whatever websites, FTP. I completely forgot the other term. I blanked out.
There's you can do whatever you BBS does that, by the way, called ILF, Innocent Lives Foundation. I'll throw the link up when it comes.
I just literally throwing it on everything. Chris Hadnacki is helping head that up.
BBS is Bulletin Board Systems. Wow, it took me a long time to remember. And we would just decimate those. We would hunt down the people. We would find out who created them, where they were at. We would create files and dossiers, and we would send them to local law enforcement. And there were multiple groups back then that used to do this. It was a great way to learn security and hacking into different things. But I completely agree with Gowrie now of there are active investigations that are going on, and there are vigilante groups like EHAP that still exist that do these things, that screw things up for law enforcement investigations all over the world all of the time. And it's a very gray area. Well, it's not a gray area. Don't hack people, even if they're doing illegal things, because your bad things are going to happen to you. And you have the chance of screwing up a much larger investigation.
The other thing, though, is just to throw a grenade in the whole thing. Something we've talked about before, like a project I've done for a long time, is Project Mariana, which is like breached databases. Theoretically, one of the things we were talking about is not most of these databases we trade and we work and we scan through are not salacial databases. They're like LinkedIn breach, and what we're doing is we're looking for our clients' data in them and making sure like those passwords aren't used within their infrastructure. But say there was a salacial one that we did, like like Adult Friend Finder, but again, I don't know anything about that site. I think it was just a dating site, but let's just say that was like some horrible weird site. what would happen if someone like created injected an account into that, like grabbed someone's information off LinkedIn, injected it inside that database. Now all of a sudden we're now using that to like hack back with bad information, and now you're hacking like an innocent like the whole thing becomes remarkably complicated. Gowrie, what was the question?
The question in chat from Praxis was less than 1% of major crime in the U.S. is solved by our law enforcement. At what point does vigilantism take over, Gulo and Gallery? This is fundamentally the problem that we're talking about right now on stream, which is ransomware is rampant right now, completely rampant, and there is functionally no real response happening for a lot of reasons. In many regards, they just do not know how to respond to this. We may be developing the response and formalizing the response, but there is no concerted, well-defined response. And that question of at what point does vigilantism take over, that is what the core of this issue is, right? At what point do corporations, we'll just put it this way, at what point do corporations not only have the right to defend themselves, but the responsibility to defend their users from actors like this, right? And that is what is like. I would posit it like this: I don't think it's ever right, correct, moral, ethical, whatever you want to say it as, that vigilantism take over, because that is a deep hole that leads to really messed up things, right? But the reason why vigilantism takes over is the concerted lack of response over a long time. That's how that happens, right? And so where we are at is there is this large industrial yearn for a cavalry to call, and we're still figuring that out.
Yeah, I think that says it best, is you're looking, who are you going to call? And then companies are going to be looking at one, but what about individuals? What about like the grandma who just bought like $500 worth of Google Play stuff and now is sending it off? Like it's no longer a banking issue. It's it gets really complicated.
Did I freeze again?
Yes,
yeah,
you
did.
froze.
Can you guys hear me?
No,
I'm back. Wow, my internet really sucks today. Vigilantism. So what if we looked at it this way? And I'm going to use Silk's old company of GE because, well, I can. If GE got hit by ransomware and they encrypted freaking everything everywhere, and you're looking for vigilantism, what is the proper response? GE is going to lose billions of dollars in lost data and doing restores and whatever, but what is it that a handful of kids who downloaded a ransomware package, they maybe spent a couple $100, couple $1,000, downloaded it, created the package, sent it out, encrypted the stuff? There's not much vigilantism that you can do, minus like mafia style hunting them down in their homes and breaking their kneecaps. There's not really any response that you can do for small scale syndicates. Yes, I can see, but a lot of this stuff is done.
I think this was much more of a general question rather than a, hunting down kids and breaking their kneecaps type question.
But brings a whole other point to his how to fell a tree.
Yeah. I get what you're saying though. Like the whole point was just like, I think that the question was, does vigilantism in this area ever become ethical because there's a lack of response? And I think at least most people, I would say no as like a moral baseline, but the reason why it occurs is because of a consistent pattern of no response. Sorry, go ahead.
So yes, but you also, lack of a better term, you shot down the Conficker point that I was trying to make earlier, because Conficker wasn't used for anything bad. It just existed. It could have been used for bad, but now ransomware is being used for bad. If there was,
it was absolutely bad though. I mean, it wasn't used for anything bad. It was very much it was
a bad thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to detract from that, but if ransomware was if there was one major ransomware, one major syndicate that was causing all of these problems, and several people identified them and were like, hey, go look at this specific person, this specific country, this specific city, this block, go do something, and law enforcement didn't do anything with it, then that's where I could see vigilantism taking place. But since this is widespread by small groups of people, there isn't much that you can really do, because back hacking them, what are you going to do? You're going to format their computer and they're going to lose their video game saves, their porn, and that's about it.
I mean, we can leave it at this. Like you said the same thing in the other side. I don't like, if you take part in vigilantism, expect that there are going to be legal ramifications, because it's just not legal. Like, we all agree, it's just not legal to go about doing this without the proper authority. And the moment you access someone's system without, authorization, you're engaging in the same type of illegal activity, illicit activity, right? Unless you have authorization. So, but yeah.
Which goes back to Gator's shirt right there.
This is the reason why you don't just put a pineapple out in the wild. You make sure to have that EULA on the pineapple.
Oh my
so
gosh.
Connecting to you. Just saying.
Doing
Unbelievable.
a really good job rubbing his chest.
Oh, yeah. I do have one thing to share with you guys. I did finally end up... This is completely switching topics for half a second. Going back to DEF CON, when we're going to the FurryCon and talking about FurryCon and DEF CON intersecting, DEF CON Furs finally got their badges out. So when you guys want to see that, let me know and we can jump into that real quick.
I think now is a good time. Let's sidetrack, and then we will start wrapping things up. Fantastic. Because like Darknet every year, it ends on time all the time.
At 9 o'clock every time. Oop, here we go.
Our stream will only last an hour every time. Ooh, right? Fancy.
Ooh.
Let's see. So here's the front.
Yeah.
And of course, Fear is the Mind Killer there on the side, printed.
Oh, that's nice.
And then on the back side.
Oh man, they only made 50 of them?
They only made 50 of them.
Wow.
So I have not checked out their GitHub yet, but yeah.
It's
cool
blinky.
to see it finally come this year. It is.
I do like their logo on the bottom.
This is one of my favorites for sure.
Oh man.
So,
with
anyway,
that, there's so much more to talk about here, and I do think we first, before you talk about anything else, CryptoCat, thank you for the topic. If anyone else has topics, go ahead, leave them as a comment down below. We'd love talking about things that you guys want us to talk about. But CryptoCat, I'm going to shout out to his channel. If anyone is interested in hacking, learning how to hack, go check out his channel. It is absolutely fantastic. He solves a ton of different challenges, and it's not always the way you're supposed to, as we found out, which is awesome. But again, there's no such thing as cheating in hacking. With that, my gosh, so much more to talk about. I love hanging out with you guys. I missed you for 2 weeks, but next week we will still be back, I believe, and we'll get back on a normal cadence. And we're going to start releasing these as a podcast as well. I will put links somewhere in the ether when we do that. Gator.
Just dropping links for CryptoCat's YouTube channel because, hey, thanks for the love there. So the shout out back. With that, so I am a big advocate of making sure that you're enabling yourself, making sure that you're the change in your organization that you want to be. Get yourself some materials. The free stuff that's out there is by Black Hills InfoSec again. I sound like a fanboy. I love how much they're giving back to the community, which is amazing, and it's free. So go use free resources. It's not behind a paywall. So the Backdoors and Breaches game are both a physical card set and or online, and it's setting up a D&D session to where you've got somebody going through and saying, hey, if you've been breached, what are the processes that you currently have written or that you know of your organization, how to start to discover this, how to find out how they're exfiltrating the data, what was their point of intrusion, what's their C2, etc. It's a free resource, and the cool thing is on each one of the cards, they also have the tools that you can use in your organization to actually get up and running. So if you're brand new to this, go pick yourself up at a free digital set or the physical card set. And with that, hey, go learn something new and love your hacker family.
Not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor,
Not a
but
sponsor.
love their stuff.
Rar. I don't have a good sign off for this week. I'm just in a tiger outfit. I think that's good enough. Happy Halloween, everyone. Is Gulo frozen? Is he trolling us?
I am a superhero.
Yeah.
Or a unicorn.
I am a superhero. I am an Avenger. I will seek revenge on you. Don't hack my shit.
No, now you're just.
Oh my goodness. With so much. I love you all. Thank you for joining Cannibal Praxius. Everyone, Taylor, oh my goodness. I love talking with you guys. I miss so many of you. CryptoCat, thank you for the topic again. And as always, hack on.